A very pleasant good afternoon to all of our viewers. We are delighted to welcome you one more time to another edition of Let's Talk. We missed having you last week, but we are back this week. Another edition of last Let's week, Talk. Of course, we had the Inter-American Division grand celebration of 100 years of existence. So we did not have our Let's Talk last week. We were facilitating that program, which began at 3 o'clock, which is our usual starting time. But today we are back and we have a very interesting topic, important and interesting topic that we will be discussing. In fact, today we begin a discussion on religious liberty. We are going to be looking over the next, in fact, the month of November. We will be considering various aspects of religious liberty. Today, we begin with the Seventh Adventist Church and religious liberty. And the next week and the other weeks ahead, we will be talking about religious liberty and public legislation, tolerance, gay marriages, and government mandates, and then our relationship with other churches. So we have some very exciting topics to discuss in the area of religious liberty this week. Today we have two special guests that we're going to be introducing you to in a while. But before we do so, we would like to invite you to bow your heads for a word of prayer. Almighty Father and our God, we give you thanks for the opportunity to share with our friends, those who are viewing on our YouTube channels, SLC Adventist and SLC Church channel, those who are viewing on our Facebook page, and those who are listening via Second Advent Radio. We pray that as we discuss this very important concept of religious liberty, that you will give us understanding. Be with our guests. We thank you for them and for their willingness to facilitate this afternoon's discussion. Grant us again your presence and your guidance. In Jesus' name, amen. So this afternoon, friends, we have with us two guests. I'm going to introduce first Pastor Stanton Adams. Pastor Stanton Adams is a pastor in the South Leeward Conference on the island of St. Kitts. He is a minister of vast experience. He prior to his coming to the South Leeward Conference, he functioned as the executive secretary for the Guyana Conference. And he has quite a wealth of experience in various areas, family life, religious liberty. He's going to be assisting us with some pastoral dimensions of religious liberty this afternoon. And then we have someone who is no stranger to us, someone I almost want to call my co-host here on Let's Talk. We have with us Attorney Natasha Baker. Attorney, we are delighted to have you with us on Let's Talk another time. It's always a pleasure having you. Welcome.
Thank you, Pastor Greene. Glad to be here again.
Yes, and Pastor Adams, I did not give you the opportunity to say a word of greeting to the viewers, but...
Well, yes, thank you again, and it is always a pleasure and delight to share in these areas, and I follow Let's Talk, and I am glad that I am afforded the opportunity today to be part of your special program today, Dr. Greene, and welcome to all of our viewers and listeners, and trust that we'll have quite an interesting conversation on this very, very critical issue right now.
Well, you know, again, we are talking religious liberty this afternoon, and it's an important subject. We want to begin by looking at what really is religious liberty. When we say religious liberty, what exactly are we talking about? What do we mean by religious liberty? And why is this such an important discussion? I don't know which one of you want to respond to that, but it's a good place to start because many of our viewers may not quite understand the impact of what we're talking about.
Well, I hope that the viewership will include majority of our church members and probably their friends who might be interested in this area. But basically, we are talking about the freedom to believe, and the rights and freedom of all people to believe, all peoples to believe. And I well, sometime later in this conversation, I will probably say why I say all peoples to believe. We believe that a person's conscience and not the government, you know, should influence his or her choice to worship or not to worship. Some people might find that strange. Why is the pastor saying for some people to worship or not to worship? Well, that freedom of choice we have is not just the matter of freedom to believe, but our religious liberty also deals with advocacy. Advocacy in the sense that we fight against laws that would inhibit an individual's religious freedom. We also deal with working to release individuals who might have been imprisoned, falsely imprisoned for their belief. And we also support the religious liberty is also about supporting the basic human rights of individuals, right? So people their rights to choose, and if they have been discriminated against because for the jobs, maybe education, etc. As you said, we have a whole line of presentation coming up that will include some of these specific areas that we are addressing. But basically, it is the religious, it is the freedom to believe, and a person's conscience, should not be violated by any institution or powers that exist, governments or whoever.
Now you mentioned some very interesting dimensions of religious liberty. I almost told you don't go so far yet, because I wanted to come back to this matter of the freedom to believe, right? That is very important. I want to add a certain dimension to it. The freedom to believe, I want to add to exercise or act upon religious conscience. And you did mention without unnecessary interference by government. I want to ask our attorney to comment on that a little bit, because it's interesting that individuals are given the freedom to believe what they want to believe. That's interesting. Attorney, can you share your perspective on that?
Sure. Yes, I think it's according to what Pastor Adams was saying, it's one of those rights where you are granted the ability to think as you wish and to follow whatever moral value system that you choose. And it's important that governments recognize that. And I think it is a universal concept. It is recognized in many governments. It's recognized internationally. It's part of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which many countries have signed off on, and they have in many ways incorporated the terms of that document into their own constitutions. And as you stated, Pastor Greene, it's not just your right to believe, but your right to practice that belief. And so that's your right to worship, to sing, to perhaps get into the streets and get on a microphone and encourage others to follow your belief system. Or in a more tangible way, to dress according to your belief, to operate, live your life, your family, send your children to schools that's in accordance with your belief. And for many, this is important. It's important for them to be able to follow the value system that we have. And we see many countries, many states recognizing this right and adhering to not have government restrictions that infringe upon that.
Now, I like this discussion. I really like the idea that individuals have the rights, and you expanded, Attorney Baker, the freedom not just to believe, but to act upon your belief. So the practical dimension of that is also very important. Somebody may be saying at this time, so is every man left to his own, do whatever he wants to do? How do we regulate this? We're going to get into that, whether or not there are limits to freedom, because suppose I believe something that is harmful to you. But we're going to deal with that in a little bit. But before we go along those lines, and before we touch the elements of advocacy that Pastor James, no, not Pastor James, Pastor Adams mentioned there, I want to go to this element. We're talking about the Seventh Adventist Church and religious liberty. So the Seventh Adventist Church has long been an advocate of religious liberty. In other words, we have stood for it. We have fought for it.
Yes.
The new convert to Adventism may not fully understand or appreciate why this is so important. Now, so can we therefore provide some kind of historical context and say why the matter of freedom on religion is so important?
Okay. Now, I was doing my own little research some years ago when I had to make a presentation on this very subject, and we can agree, or Adventists should be proud of the fact that for even before 1901, somewhere about is I guess it's from our historical records, for more than 150 years, the Seventh Adventist Church has been committed to promoting freedom of beliefs for all peoples. And notice we said for all peoples. For more than 150 years, the Seventh Adventist Church has been committed, right, to promoting the freedom of beliefs for all peoples. And the religious liberty for us, we focus on this area for many reasons. And if we look at the scripture, because there's where we have to go first, we have to understand the theological foundation, the historical foundation, the eschatological foundation. I also would want to add even the missiological reasons why. Because we understand our position as a church and what we believe. So we notice that from the biblical position that and theological position that God made us as free moral agents. The fact that Lucifer, who became Satan in the very presence of God, had freedom to choose whether and brought about this great cosmic conflict. And then the angels, the 1/3 of the angels that exercised the choice to follow him, then we notice that even Genesis, the first account, the first chapter, God made our first parents as free moral agents. They had a choice to choose to obey or not to obey. And so on those grounds, we see how it is. All peoples are created with the freedom of choice, the freedom to love God or to reject him. Persecution and coercion is Satan's trademark. And since God, this is the theological, biblical view, since God is a God of love, love cannot be coerced. So God has created us, all human beings, with the free moral choice to choose, either to choose him or to reject him. And we respect that freedom.
And to add to that, Pastor Greene, as a new believer, I think it's important to appreciate the fact that one could not have chosen to be that new believer had it not be for that freedom that we now have. You know, many have fought before historically for this freedom. Many have been persecuted, and we have the benefit of enjoying the freedoms that we now have because people have fought for those freedoms. Otherwise, if we didn't have it, we would be under one church that may not be in line with our beliefs. And we also have a commission given by God to preach to others and for them to be able to accept what we preach if they so choose. But we can't do that if any particular country or countries have prohibited that right to choose or to change or to not believe.
So what I hear from both of you is that the matter of religious liberty, the freedom to choose one's religion, is a God-given right. When God created human beings, he made them with the power of choice. God does not force us to worship him. He gave us the right. I mean, this text comes to my mind with Joshua talking to the Israelites, choose you this day whom you will serve. Yeah. But He said, as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. He said, I said before you life and death, choose life, but he is not going to force them to do it. He may counsel them to do it, but at the end of the day, it is their God-given right to determine whether or not they're going to follow God or they're not going to follow God. And that principle we're therefore building on. I think that's a very important principle. And I want to follow on from there. So if it is our God-given right to choose our beliefs, then by implication, we must also respect the right to choose. And I should also respect an individual's right not to choose my religion, not to believe what I believe. I believe that the average person understands that. I hope the average person understands that. What may be more challenging in this idea of religious freedom is the idea that I should defend your right to choose, even though I do not share your belief system. And Pastor Adams mentioned the matter of advocacy, and attorney, here is the point. I respect your right to choose, but if you are persecuted based on your right, then I should be willing to say, it is your right to choose. Some of our members struggle with the thought of separating defending someone with a different belief system from supporting that belief. Now, I want to first ask the attorney, because, of course, as an attorney, I know the matter of defending and giving people the benefit of choice in terms of their belief system and how they practice it. That's something that you may have to deal with on a daily basis. So first, I want you to speak to that, and then Pastor Adams can bring in the Seventh Adventist dimension to that.
It's interesting that you use the whole concept of defending, because we have, if we take that analogy out a little bit, in the legal system, we have what are called public defenders, and many ask, like, how can you represent someone who has done bad? For example, we're just, using this analogy. And the whole idea is you defend the rights of the person. So you argue that they should have certain rights, even though they have committed a crime. It's the same with religious liberty. I think the problem that many of us have is we have difficulty separating the belief system that they have from the person. So what we are doing is we are defending that person's right to choose. We're not defending the rights of their belief system. So we're not saying that their belief system is correct, and therefore we are advocating for their belief system. What we're saying is that we believe that this person should have the right to choose what belief system they have and to follow that choice, and that everyone should have that choice, because in the same way, we as Adventists want to have the choice to follow our belief system. And we want that person as well, if at some point they choose to change their belief system to some other belief system, they have the right to do that. And I think that is our responsibility as loving Christian neighbors. It's not that we are advocating for their religious belief. We're advocating for that person to have the right to choose. Of course, and I know we'll probably get into this at some point, there are some limits to that, but overall, everyone should have the right to choose. And we as Adventists, as Christian believers, as followers of Christ, we should promote that right to choose.
So the idea here, Pastor Adams, I'm going to come to you in a little bit, but the idea here is therefore that when you choose differently to me, I must respect that choice.
Yes.
And speak up in your defense should you be persecuted for making that choice, because that is your God-given responsibility. That's a very interesting concept. And like I said, I know many of our members struggle with that. Very interesting. Share your thoughts, Pastor.
Well, continuing on what attorney said, because, and let me make the bridge, let me make the crossover. Our church historical, we have to understand what happened with our church historically in some respect. We have not, as a body, as a church, developed if I want to say, a tolerance, I think that's the word I want to use, for religious pluralism. We live in a world, in a global context, and I guess the scriptures is pointing us to that. That is why we have the message of Revelation going into all the world. In Matthew, we have the Revelation message, Revelation, our divine mandate to all kindred, nation, tongue, and people. You have to prophesy again before all these nations and kindreds and tongue and people. And these people embrace religion in all the sincerity based on the light and the evidence of truth that was brought to them. And so we have to make some kind of a paradigm shift in our thinking. And I think we have to have more programs like these that are educative, to have our members understand that we must embrace the whole issue of religious pluralism and develop a tolerance as a church for the particular belief systems. Because I remember I was in a class with one of the gurus of our church, and what he said when we were discussing the same thing about religious pluralism has stuck with me. God has not left himself a witness. I'm quoting, God has not left himself without a witness in any rank or race or place. God has a sincere people in any religion, world religions. And if we are supposed to reach these people with the truth that we say we have, we cannot show indifference, disdain, intolerance for people's religion, people's faith, because it is, as the attorney said, it is people who meet and not religions. It is people who meet and not religions, right? And so I think that is important. And historically, the new believer, and not only the new believer, because I believe that some of you more mature believers don't know that our pioneers were strong advocates for religious freedom. In fact, we led the way. We led the way in the 1800s during that period. During the American Civil War, I went to the archives to find some of this history. During the American Civil War, we led in the matter of non-combatancy for Seventh Adventists who were in the army, you see. And then during the late 80s to when there was the issue of the Sunday law, the church appealed to the United States Constitution for freedom of conscience and religious liberty. And then the church was able to garner international support and form the International Society. So by the end, between 1889 and by the time we got to 1893, there was an Interreligious Liberty Association, and our church, the Seventh Adventist Church, championed that, speaking on behalf of religious liberty, not just where our history began, but internationally. So we have a legacy of talking to the issue of religious liberty and tolerance. And because we have a missiological aspect of our religion that we practice, that we have to proclaim the message, all the more why we have to understand and really form bridges and establish relationships with people of other faiths and other beliefs, and not to be indiscriminate or to make, to be intolerant of other people's faith and other people's religion.
So now this is interesting. You have said a mouthful there, and I want to slow it down a little bit, because on the one hand, you're saying that our eschatological emphasis, our prophetic focus challenges us to preach a certain way, to believe a certain thing, and to behave a certain way. On the other hand, we want to be tolerant of others. Now, the concept here, therefore, these almost seem diametrically opposed to one another, and this brings the tension. So as an individual who decides that he or she is not going to follow a particular religious belief system, they're going to follow a different religious belief system, and they've been persecuted. As a church, we should stand up and say, listen, every individual has the freedom of choice, and if that's their choice, we respect that. And Attorney Baker, you may be called upon to defend somebody publicly. In fact, the Adventist church would be behind. So if the church, not the church, if the government should decide that, and I'm using this purposefully, that Sunday is no longer going to be a public holiday, it is going to be a regular work day, and anybody who goes to church on Sunday and doesn't go to work will be penalized for not going to church. How should the Seventh Adventist Church relate to that? Should we clap our hands and say, yes, the government is right because Saturday is a Sabbath and they shouldn't be worshiping on Sunday, so squeeze them? Is that to be the approach?
Well, I think that's an easy one. Definitely not. We definitely should stand up against that. Even though Sunday is not the day in which we worship, and clearly we have our Fourth Amendment mandate that Saturday is a Sabbath, we should definitely advocate for those who wish to worship on Sunday, that government not prohibit them from doing that. That's part of their religious freedom. The same way we are appreciative of those who advocate on our behalf for the right to worship on Saturday, even if they, on Sabbath, even if they don't share that same belief system. And I think it is our duty to stand up for those who may be persecuted in that way. Otherwise, I think that for those where we feel to speak up in that area, we could appear to be fake, for lack of a better word, because all this time, all these years, we've been advocating for us to have the right to have Sabbaths off and worship on Sabbath, and trying to get the world to appreciate the importance of that for us, and for us to not stand up for those who would like that same right, although we don't believe in Sunday as a Sabbath. It would be disingenuous of us, quite honestly.
Very, very interesting. And that's precisely the point. I am putting a lot of emphasis on this because I know that some persons struggle with it, but we do advocate for freedom of worship, and freedom of worship, freedom of religion says, whatever you choose, that's your choice. We can encourage you to do otherwise, but if that's your choice, and we're going to respect it. Now, I want to bring this home a little more, and I'm going to ask the pastor this now. Pastor Adam, so you have the responsibility to shepherd a flock of believers, to encourage them in the right. Here is a husband and a wife, an elder from your church, in fact, and his wife decides she no longer wants to be a Seventh-day Adventist. She wants to be a Roman Catholic. Based on what we have said so far, that is her right. The constitutional provision that Attorney Baker made reference to suggests that not only do you have the freedom to worship, to religious belief, but you have the freedom to change that belief. So should she, as the elder's wife, decide that she no longer wants to be a Seventh Adventist, she wants to be a Catholic, or for that matter, a Baha'i faith or something else, then her husband should respect that right, not so?
Yes, certainly.
Okay. And the attitude of the church members towards her, I want to put in that part.
Must also respect the right. Still we're talking about the person's right to choose based on their own conscience, right to choose. That's it. But I had a life situation like that in my home conference, where we had a pastor whose wife was a Catholic. He served as a local elder, and then as a lay pastor. He even served in a hospital as one of the administrators during a period of time. His wife was a Catholic. The church never discriminated against. We showed all the kindness and appreciation and everything. And that is what we ought to do, because you see, nobody's outside there and mentioning the word Catholic, even though that's not a question, because we are talking to this issue. I better say that God has a sincere people in every faith, right? And Mr. White said something. I was searching for that particular reference before I came on this room, but I didn't find it. I know I have it somewhere, that in entering a place, because we have mission, we want to present the gospel, we should not store up undue hostility. And even the Catholics, she says, we should not make the Catholics our avowed enemies, because God has a sincere people, the other sheep concept, that are not of this fold that I would bring. So, traditionally, we have been so antagonistic and we have said a lot of things, even in our evangelistic preaching under our tents about not only Catholic, but other religions. What we say, maybe in an attempt to gain grounds or something, but truth need no defense. The truth is truth. All we have to do is present truth. I just thought I should mention that, right? While you mentioned the Catholic, but there's a particular quotation, right? There will be those, and I'm quoting directly, I'm taking my eyes off the screen to quote directly from the SDA Bible Commentary, Volume 5, page 1121. There will be those who are saved who live outside of the assignable limits of biblical revelation, meaning that everybody may not hear the Sabbath truth or hear all of our fundamental beliefs, but yet God will save them. How do we treat with that? Are we thinking religious liberty and people of other faiths and beliefs, right? There are those who are outside the assignable, that's what she says, limits of biblical revelation, who God will save because they will live according to the truth and the light that they have. God's test, right? For even the heathen.
Dr. Greene, I want to add another dimension to that concept. Oh. Sometimes we should take a step back and ask ourselves, what would be the benefit to us, to God, to the belief system of forcing someone to believe the way we do? Is that the idea that God wants for his people? Does he want a group of people who are forced to believe in him, or he want free will followers? And I think if we can think about that, think about what God wants, follow how the Bible has etched out many of these historical stories. We have to believe the idea that everyone should have the free will, and only with that free will they can choose to follow God, and that's the type of persons that God want follow him, those who have truly decided to do that and were not forced. And I think that's the whole idea of religious liberty. And one other concept I just want to touch on, it's not just about the church as a whole standing up for rights. It's even on a more basic level, the way we treat others who are not of our faith. Sometimes we tend to be more loving, caring, kind to those who we worship with, we fellowship with, and we tend to tone that down in some respect, or not on the same level for those who are of a different faith. I think the same concept goes that we should be loving across the board. We should let people know that we appreciate you as a human being, as a person, as a child of God, regardless of what you believe. Now we can, and through that, continue to preach and teach what we believe with hopes that they follow. But at the same time, we shouldn't treat them any different because they have a different belief system.
I had a discussion with someone recently, a very interesting discussion. I remember a few years ago, a former conference president was sharing his experience of his son who grew up in his house at one time as a young adult, decided that he no longer wants to attend church. And the father's initial reaction was, you're going to live in my house, you're going to abide by my rules, you're going to go to church. And the son said to him, worship is not supposed to be forced. And the father said, when he heard that, he backed off. He said, okay, that is true. Worship is not supposed to be forced. That's a clear biblical principle. However, you are going to, this is my house. I'm a Seventh Adventist, and everything I have, keep the Sabbath. And the son said, no problem, I'll respect that, but don't force me to go to church. And he decided not to force him on the principle that worship is not supposed to be forced. It's supposed to be free will. Eventually, the son came around and he connected with God, etc. But I think it was a wonderful illustration of the concept of religious freedom, even in our own homes. Because I see someone asking a question here in the chat about the spouse who decides not to let me see if I can get this. What then is our responsibility towards the spouse who decides to leave the church? Should we no longer take the biblical truth to him or her? I suppose we should encourage, if my spouse decides to leave the church, I definitely want to encourage her. But there's a difference between encouragement and force. Do you agree?
Yes, we agree that because the person goes, you're not going to treat them as spouse as anathema. You would want to see how best you can show unconditional love. Maybe that might cause them to return, but to be hostile and even arrogant because somebody has made that kind of a decision. And I'm glad that pastor exercised wisdom. He could have been even hostile or arrogant and insistent that, okay, since you're in my space, on my roof, you must do that. If somebody makes that choice, we still have to lovingly pursue them and hoping that they would return. We still have to, we must always be exercising, extending the olive branch, as you would say, because you never know. We don't know why people will probably have made a decision. Sometimes they can be some whatever reasons, but we must always extend the olive branch, that they must know that you are still welcome here. You are still welcome here, and even if they choose to practice another faith, another religion, there are those who have practiced. Who have left our church and went and practiced other faiths, other religion, but the church lovingly related to them. And I can attest to the fact of some people who return to the church, the Seventh-day Adventist church, even though they left to practice another religion, yes. So it's.
Well, sorry to interrupt, but I was going to say our time is limited, and I do want to get in a few other aspects. Later in the month, we will discuss our relationship with other religious bodies. That's going to be on the final Sabbath of this month. But I do want to touch briefly on the matter of respect for other Christian denominations and adopting an objective approach to ministry. I sit in a position where I get all kinds of comments from members. We just, for example, finished in Antigua and in the National Independent Church Service, and there are some members who still think, well, we have no right officiating in a joint service with other denominations. There are people who think that way strongly. Interestingly enough, the Baptist minister told me the same thing of his church members. He said some of them are on his case for joining with other denominations in hosting a joint church service, and they're calling him backslidden and the kind of things that you would hear people say. So it's interesting that somehow church members are not. You used the word earlier, Pastor James, Pastor Adams, when you said that we are not in the habit of the pluralistic approach. We tend to be very closed-minded when it comes to religious beliefs. We believe this, and so far as we are concerned, anybody who does not believe it is anathema. They're going to hell. We should have no association with them. My question is to both of you. My question is, what value is there to us in cooperating with other Christian bodies on matters of common interest? That's a very specific question. What value is there to us in cooperating with other Christians on matters of common interest?
Well, there are many, many values, well, not many, many benefits. They are, because who are the other faiths? There are many people who are intelligent, devout, righteous, and they comprise Anglicans, Baptists, Muslims, Hindus, Buddhists, Baha'is, Catholics, whoever. It's tremendous to your benefit. I was just listening. I have quite some of my relations in London. My wife likes to listen to one of those church services since COVID. They have the program on, and just this year in our pre-workers meeting, while we had our pastors meeting, Dr. Greene, you were mentioning the emphasis in community services and going out. there are some situations where we might not have all the resources at our available at our particular local denominational church. He was able to get people of other religions, other faiths, to do welfare ministry in the name of the Seventh Adventist Church. And these people from other religions with all of these skill set, nurses, doctors, eye specialists, dentists, whoever from other religions came, established a tremendous community service outreach program under the auspices and direction of the Seventh Adventist Church. It was the Seventh Adventist Church, but he used people from other religious beliefs. So we're saying that there are other devout Christians from other persuasion, other believe that we can do things that can benefit society and humanity. And so what's the issue? What's the problem? That's why I'm saying that we need to develop a tolerance, and there must be some kind of mental, some kind of paradigm shift, because this idea, we had it historically, but because the world has become so has been reduced to a global village, globalization, and the technology that we have today, we have to think differently as a church, as a denomination. We are not the only one that benefit from the grace and the mercies of the Most High God. We have to see it that way.
I mean, that's an interesting point. If we are doing community outreach and we want to do, let's say we want to deal with a particular area, health, and we don't have the expertise, and there's a Catholic sister or brother or Muslim brother or sister who has that expertise, then why not reach out and partner with them? That's the idea. So when I ask the question about what benefit is there for us in cooperating with others, we are looking at something to benefit humanity. I believe when we do outreach, when we do something to help the community, it must not be that I'm going to do this only if these people decide to come to my church. No. I must be willing to do it with an open mind as a contribution to the development of humanity. And if there are other persons who want to make a contribution to the development of humanity, then why not embrace them? That's
and I can tell you that, again, historically, and going back from my own personal experience, Dr. Greene, as you mentioned, I was a departmental person before I became an executive officer of my conference. I was in family ministries, men's ministries, and I was able, by the grace of God and the men around me, my steering committee, to put 1,000 men on the street one Sabbath afternoon. And that 1,000-man march was hue and a cry against the upsurge of domestic violence in my country. And you know what? There were other men's ministries that did not belong to the Seventh Adventist Church that joined with us. The man who was in charge of one of the pillar organizations of the country, he was an Anglican. And he knew me personally, and he said, Pastor Adam, this is tremendous. I am going to bring my men's ministry, and they have another name, the Brotherhood of Saint, whatever is their name. I'm going to bring my ministry. When y'all have the next conference, we're going to join with you. And then some others, bring some others from some other churches and join with us. And before long, we had thousands of men who would come together. And you know what? United UNFPA spotters, US Embassy spotters began to give us money, give us several things to promote the program of domestic violence. You know what it is to see this manpower on the ground, but it was under the auspices of the Seventh Adventist Church, but other denominations were involved, because we are doing something to benefit humanity and to talk to discourage of domestic violence that was raising its ugly head in the land. It was the Seventh Adventist Church who made the media and who had all of the thing, but we had other people from other denominations with us.
Attorney Baker?
Yeah, I was saying too, in addition to all that said, which I agree with, there's some benefit to building friendships outside of our church. When we build close relationships with persons of other faith or no faith at all, and they get to appreciate who we are, because we have to understand, unless someone maybe comes to a crusade or comes to our church, there are many who do not understand what Seventh-day Adventists believe. We are probably seen as a weird group of people who have weird beliefs that nobody understands. But when you get to build friendships with others and they understand your belief system, they understand who you are as a person, those benefits could go a long way, even in terms of religious liberty. If we have to fight for freedom, that could go a long way. What if one of these friendships we made is someone who's a business owner, and they hire someone who's Adventist? They could always go back and say, oh, I know such and such from the Seventh-day Adventist Church. They do good in the community. I understand their belief system. I understand why you chose this, and I'm going to give you Sabbaths off. I'm just giving that as an example, but we never know how far these friendships can go, even in government, wherever you build these relationships, people know you, they understand what your belief system is, and that can go a long way. There's a saying that says good friends is better than pocket change. People can stand up for you even when they don't believe what you believe, just because you've built that relationship through community work, through fighting for a particular belief system, working together on a cause. You build these relationships.
Excellent point there. The matter of relationships and where they can carry you as a spin-off benefit. I had an experience where I was working on a particular territory, and we were doing prison ministry. We were experiencing some significant challenges with establishing a church in the prison. In the meantime, I became very close to a gentleman. I had no idea that he was the gentleman in charge of the prison, And when it was revealed to me that, listen, we were having these roadblocks in the prison, and they said who the gentleman was that was in charge of the prison, I said, oh, he's my friend. Let me go talk to him. And I went and I spoke to the gentleman, and he said, Pastor, whatever you want, just say. Again, relationships is what matters. So that is so important. Now, Attorney, I want to ask you another question, because there are limits to freedom. We have been talking about individuals having the right to believe what they want to believe and practice what they want to practice and change their religion accordingly. But there are limits to freedom, limits to freedom and limits to liberty. From the perspective of an attorney, can you give us some examples of what some of these may be? When we talk about limits to freedom, how does this look? What do we really mean? An individual is not ultimately free to do anything he or she wants to do. So how do we determine where the limits fall?
The line on that can get extremely difficult at times, but overall, every society has an interest in protecting their citizens as a whole. The idea is that we're trying to promote a healthy community, healthy humanity. So if you have some belief system that causes pain, infliction, or even death, or promotes in some way a society that is not conducive to a basic sense of morality, then I think that it's going too far. And, we can give some examples of that. We have where even in this day, there are churches who are practicing human sacrifice. The other day I did a presentation and we were talking about abuse of power. And we see some churches that somehow, over time get members to believe, or pastors specifically, who get members to believe that if they conduct certain sexual acts on them, God is going to bless them. Or if they commit some type of harm to themselves, God is going to bless them. And these are the things that we want to avoid. Because at the end of the day, society has an interest in protecting its citizens. We have an interest in protecting children. We have an interest in protecting women from abuse, men from abuse. And if we have churches that are promoting that type of behavior, then it has to stop. There have been cases in the Supreme Court where we've gone back and forth on this issue. And there have been many, but to highlight just a few, we have the Rastafarian religion that practices, in some ways, the use of marijuana. Now, I know we've had a whole marijuana discussion recently in the media and stuff about its benefits, et cetera, but at the base of it, the THC levels in marijuana can lead to some sort of alteration of the functioning of your brain. And so that is an interest that some societies would have in not having people walking around overdosing on this type of drug. And so they may want to limit the use of it and may not have a particular religion engage in that. There's another drug called peyote that another religious body indulged in. Or there's a concept of polygamy. You know, some religions practice polygamy, but for many reasons, based on research or based on the customs of a particular society, that is not something that that society wants because they establish that there are more danger to it than good. In some cases, they may ignore it or turn a blind eye, not prosecute it on a level that perhaps the law requires. But overall, society has an interest in protecting its citizens. And if our religious practice goes too far, where now it's in some way infringing on a healthy community, a healthy humanity, whether it's for children, for adults, then to some extent the government has to step in and say, no, this should not be allowed. If we decide to, as a church one day, just go in the middle of the street and stop traffic and say, you know, we're going to do this for an hour because it's part of our religious belief, then the government has an interest in saying, well, you're going to stop traffic for an hour, roads are going to be blocked, people have places to go. Is this something that we feel that should continue? Did you receive permission for this before? So yes, there definitely has to be limits because society overall has an interest in promoting a healthy, well-functioning community. And we saw a lot of conflict with this even during the COVID-19 era when it came to vaccinations and all that conversation. And there are some lines that are blurred and it becomes difficult at times to determine where to bridge that gap. But we have to recognize that there are limits.
Now, very interesting. So there are limits. The government has a responsibility to protect its citizens. And if your religious belief is going to be a danger to the citizens of the nation, then the government is going to want to step in and say, you know, we want to do this. Now, as you mentioned, the line gets blurred sometimes because some people feel that, well, the government's interference is too much here or too much there. And that's where it gets a little fuzzy sometimes. But generally speaking, I want to raise the issue. I don't have much time, but the issue of misogyny, where a particular religious belief may decide that women have no place. And you know, we hear a lot these days. In fact, there is this uprising right now over freedom and whether the woman should use a hijab or not and that kind of thing. So a government, sometimes the religious views are sponsored by the government, but generally speaking, governments would want to make sure that their citizens have certain basic freedoms. And if a particular religious persuasion is limiting those freedoms, then most likely the government will want to step in and say, hey, you have gone too far here. So that's an interesting perspective. I do want to, in the interest of time here, I do want to ask this question. How do we balance? I'm going to come back to freedom if we have the time, but how do we balance our prophetic heritage with the matter of freedom of religion? In other words, as Seventh Adventists, we see ourselves fulfilling a particular role. We are to call out people from Babylon, from corruption, from false teachings and false doctrine, etc. At the same time, we are advocating for freedom of religion. So while I am calling out and saying that, you know, this is corruption, I am going to say you have the right not to believe if you don't want to. How do we balance that?
Yeah, we have to call out, that's truth. But again, we do not have to do that while we are showing hostility or arrogance, as I mentioned before, towards other people. For example, do I have to bash other people's faith and belittle them and make them look, you know, insignificant in order to promote my mission the message that I have to proclaim, and we know which message we have to proclaim. Yeah, and we know which are the ones that really what the real tension is over what. As Seventh Adventists, we really know that, you know. So I think I remember having this conversation with one of some colleagues of mine. I think one of the professors with us, and that's what we said. For example, how do I talk to my Muslim neighbor? How do I talk to my Hindu neighbor? I'm from Guyana, so I'm using those. I've lived among Muslims. I've lived among Hindus. You know, how do I talk to my Muslim neighbor? How do I talk to my Hindu neighbor? How do I present the message of Christ? Well, there's a biblical classical example. When Paul went there to in Athens, Greek mythology, the place was infested with all of these strange gods. He went there to Athens. He went going up to Mars Hill, and when he entered the place, he did not condemn the people's religion indiscriminately. He didn't say all of y'all are heathens and y'all condemned to hell and on and on. He began by commending them, looking at commonalities. He said, I perceive that you're very religious people because I've seen all of these deities here, but I'm going to tell you about somebody that you don't know. There's another one, an unknown God. And he used that as a foothold, as an entering wedge to talk to them and preach to them from Genesis to Revelation. The result was not overwhelming, but the results came afterwards. I'm saying that he did not show antagonism or intolerance. He was on a mission. You see, so I believe that we can balance this thing by presenting. And attorney said that earlier, that we must form bridges and form relationships. Right? We can only influence our friends. We might win the argument, the theological debate, but we might lose an opportunity to influence one for Christ by our kindness and compassion and those things that we ought to do as Seventh Adventists, the peculiar people of God. And I feel so passionate about this particular thing because I think that the church we are taking too long to understand this. That in this plural context, we must embrace other religions and see them and see the adherents as people of value and worth just like us. And so when we present this unique triangle message that we have that is so dear and near to our heart, it should not be with any arrogance or hostility. You know, form bridges. If I talk to my Muslim neighbor, I look at the 5 pillars of Islam to see where we have things in common. And by the way, there are a lot of things in common, right? Because right at the Central Church in Georgetown, where I pastored, there was Dr. Mission, a massive Muslim mosque there. And every Friday, they have a line of people, the street people, those who are addicts and all kind of things, from the line of the church, 2 corners across to the main street going down Georgetown. They're giving out food and bread and all of these things. We have a community service, that's alms giving for them, and that's one of the tenets. We can start a conversation there. So I'm just trying to say that how do we balance this thing? We should not be arrogant. We should not form bridges. We should not take down the walls. See where we have things in common, start the conversation, and lead people to see the truths that we have.
So building bridges is the point. Our time has expired. Unfortunately, it's a very interesting discussion. Our time has expired, but guess what? We're going to continue next week. I mean, for the whole month of November, we are discussing religious liberty. And next week, we are talking about religious liberty and public legislation. This is an interesting one, religious liberty and public legislation. Well, let me not ask the question now. That is next week. We want you to join us. We're going to have a very intriguing discussion next week. We want you to be back here with us, 3 p.m. Atlantic Standard Time. Our time is up. We thank you. Sister Baker, you looked like you had something else to say or a little contribution to make. We will give you the opportunity to go right ahead.
No, I did. I just wanted to add to the question you had, which is, I don't see them as the same. You speak the truth. Those who follow. A lot of times that truth could come through the way we live, the way we set an example. We see that example in Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, Daniel, all over the Bible. So we don't have to force anyone to believe what we believe. We just speak the truth and give people the freedom to choose if they want to follow or not.
That's right. And I want to add, as we close today, that I may not be in favor of your religious belief. but I ought to love you as an individual. Not believing what you believe does not mean that you're my enemy. That's very important. It's very important for us to recognize that as God's children, we recognize that we have one enemy, and that's the devil. The people out there who believe differently are not our enemies. They're individuals that we are supposed to be winning for Jesus, and we are to love them and cherish them and let them know that we genuinely care about their interests. And that way, we are going to be able to better exemplify the cause of Christ to them. Well, this has been a very intriguing discussion. We're going to continue next week. As I said, next week, we're going to talk about religious liberty and what did I say? Public legislation. You know, does the government have the right to make certain legislation? That's our discussion for next week. Well, that's all the time we have. See you next week, same time. May God